The morning sun cast long shadows across the small town of Millfield as retired Master Sergeant David Chun pulled his old pickup truck into the parking lot of the Veterans Affairs office. At 62, his weathered hands still showed the calluses from decades of military service, and his posture remained straight despite the invisible weight of 3 combat tours and countless sleepless nights. The Purple Heart pin on his jacket caught the light as he stepped out of his truck, adjusting his worn baseball cap that read Army Veteran in faded letters. David had served his country for 28 years, rising through the ranks from a fresh-faced private to a respected master sergeant who had led troops through some of the most dangerous missions in Afghanistan and Iraq. His chest bore the scars of shrapnel, his mind carried the memories of fallen comrades, and his heart held the pride of serving something greater than himself. But today he simply needed help with his disability claim that had been delayed for over 18 months. The VA office buzzed with the usual morning activity. Behind the reception desk sat Jennifer Walsh, a 20-something woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and manicured nails who had been working there for only 6 months. She barely looked up from her phone as David approached, her fingers still scrolling through social media posts. When he cleared his throat politely, she glanced up with obvious irritation. "Can I help you?" Jennifer asked in a tone that suggested she would rather be anywhere else. Her eyes quickly scanned David's appearance, taking in his simple jeans, flannel shirt, and work boots. To her, he looked like just another old man seeking handouts from the government. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm David Chun, and I have an appointment at 9:30 to check on my disability claim status," David said respectfully, his voice carrying the discipline and courtesy that had been ingrained in him through decades of military service. Jennifer rolled her eyes slightly and turned to her computer screen with exaggerated reluctance. "Social Security number?" she demanded without looking at him. David provided his information while standing patiently at the counter. Around them, other veterans waited in plastic chairs, some reading outdated magazines, others staring at their phones, or simply gazing out the windows. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting an institutional glare on the beige walls decorated with generic patriotic posters. "Your caseworker isn't in today," Jennifer announced after a few moments of typing. "You'll have to reschedule." "Ma'am, this is the 3rd time I've been told to reschedule," David replied calmly. "I drove 2 hours to get here, and my claim has been pending for 18 months. Could someone else perhaps review my file?" Jennifer looked up at him with barely concealed annoyance. "Look, I don't know what to tell you. These things take time. You can't just expect special treatment because you think you deserve it." The words hung in the air like a slap. Several other veterans in the waiting area looked up from their magazines and phones, sensing the tension. David felt his jaw tighten, but his voice remained steady when he responded. "I'm not asking for special treatment, ma'am. I'm simply trying to get help with benefits I've earned through my service to this country." Jennifer leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "Earned? Listen, we get dozens of people in here every day claiming they earned something. Half of you probably never even saw combat. The government can't just hand out money to everyone who asks." The waiting room fell silent. A younger veteran with a prosthetic leg stopped scrolling on his phone and stared at the exchange. An elderly man wearing a Vietnam veteran hat slowly removed his glasses and cleaned them with shaking hands. The disrespect was palpable, hanging in the air like smoke. David's hands remained steady at his sides, though his knuckles showed white beneath his weathered skin. "Ma'am, I served 28 years, including 3 combat deployments. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for assistance with processing paperwork for benefits that are legally mine under federal law." "Whatever," Jennifer said with a dismissive wave. "Like I said, your caseworker isn't here. Come back next week, maybe the week after, and next time, don't expect us to drop everything just because you show up." She turned back to her phone, effectively dismissing him. The other staff members in the office had noticed the exchange, but seemed unwilling to intervene. David stood there for a moment, processing not just the rejection, but the profound disrespect that had been shown not just to him, but to every veteran in that room. "Thank you for your time," David said quietly, his military training preventing him from responding in anger despite the burning feeling in his chest. He turned and walked toward the exit, his back straight and his pace measured. As he reached the door, the young veteran with the prosthetic leg called out, "Hey, Master Sergeant." David turned to see the man standing up, his purple heart visible on his jacket. "Semper Fi, brother." "Huh," David replied with a slight nod, recognizing a fellow warrior who understood the weight of service and sacrifice. Outside in the parking lot, David sat in his truck for several minutes, staring at the VA building through his windshield. He wasn't angry for himself alone. He had faced worse treatment in combat zones and had learned to endure disrespect from those who had never worn a uniform. But he thought about all the other veterans who would walk through those doors, especially the younger ones still struggling to adjust to civilian life, the ones fighting invisible wounds that might not be as obvious as missing limbs. David pulled out his cell phone, an older model that he had used for years because it worked and he saw no need to replace something that functioned properly. He scrolled through his contacts until he found a number he hadn't called in over 5 years. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell had served under him early in her career when she was a fresh second lieutenant learning the ropes from experienced NCOs. Now, according to the Christmas cards they exchanged annually, she worked in the Pentagon's Veterans Affairs Liaison Office. Before he could second-guess himself, David dialed the number. The phone rang several times before a familiar voice answered. "Colonel Mitchell's office. This is Captain Rodriguez." "Good morning, Captain. This is retired Master Sergeant David Chun. I served with Colonel Mitchell in Afghanistan from 2009 to 2011. Is she available?" "Let me check, Master Sergeant. Please hold." After a brief pause, Sarah's voice came on the line, warm with recognition. "David Chun, it's been too long. How are you doing?" "I'm well, ma'am. Thank you for asking. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Never too busy for one of the best NCOs I ever served with," Sarah replied. "What can I do for you?" David hesitated for a moment, then decided to be direct. "Ma'am, I'm having some difficulties with the VA office here in Millfield. My disability claim has been delayed for over 18 months, and today I was treated with significant disrespect by the staff. I'm not calling to complain for myself, but I'm concerned about how other veterans are being treated." Sarah's voice grew serious. "Tell me exactly what happened, David." David recounted the morning's events in detail, keeping his description factual and professional. He described Jennifer's dismissive attitude, her questioning of veteran service records, and her general disrespect toward everyone in the waiting room. He mentioned the other veterans who had witnessed the exchange and how the atmosphere of the office seemed to normalize such treatment. "This is completely unacceptable," Sarah said when he finished. "David, can you send me the details of your case number and the specific office location? I want to look into this personally." "Ma'am, I don't want to cause trouble for anyone. I just think the situation needs attention." "David, you're not causing trouble. You're reporting a serious problem that affects the welfare of veterans who have served their country honorably. This is exactly the kind of issue my office exists to address." They talked for a few more minutes, catching up briefly on family and mutual acquaintances from their service days. Sarah promised to follow up within the week and asked David to document everything he could remember about the interaction. After ending the call, David drove home to the small farm he had purchased with his retirement savings. The 40-acre property was modest but well-maintained, with a vegetable garden that supplied most of his food and a workshop where he restored old furniture as a hobby. His wife of 35 years, Maria, was tending to her flower beds when he pulled into the driveway. "How did it go at the VA office?" she asked, looking up from her roses. Maria knew her husband well enough to read the tension in his shoulders and the set of his jaw. "Not well," David admitted as he joined her in the garden. "But I made a phone call that might help." Maria had been an Army wife through multiple deployments and relocations. She understood the military culture and the bonds between soldiers that transcended rank and time. When David told her about his conversation with Sarah, she nodded approvingly. "Good. You've helped so many young soldiers over the years. Maybe it's time to let someone help you." That evening, David sat at his kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and began writing down everything he could remember about not just that day's interaction, but all the problems he had encountered with the Millfield VA office over the past year and a half. He documented dates, times, names when he knew them, and specific examples of poor service or unprofessional behavior. As he wrote, David reflected on his years of service. He remembered the young soldiers he had mentored, the missions he had led, the sacrifices made by countless men and women who had worn the uniform. He thought about his friend Tommy Ramirez, who had died in his arms during an IED explosion in Kandahar, and how Tommy had joined the army to serve his country and take care of his family back home. The disrespect he had experienced that morning wasn't just about him. It was about every veteran who had raised their right hand and sworn to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. It was about every family member who had waited anxiously for their soldier to come home safely. It was about a promise that America had made to those who served, a promise that seemed to be forgotten by people like Jennifer Walsh. David finished his notes well after midnight, his handwriting still precise despite his age and the arthritis in his joints. He sealed the pages in an envelope addressed to Colonel Mitchell and placed it on the kitchen counter to mail the next morning. 3 days later, David received a phone call from Sarah. Her voice was tight with controlled anger. "David, I've reviewed the files you sent and conducted some preliminary inquiries. What you described is not an isolated incident. We found a pattern of similar complaints about that particular office, and several other veterans have reported comparable experiences with the same staff member you encountered. What happens now?" David asked. "Now, things get very interesting," Sarah replied. "I've briefed my commanding general, and he's quite concerned about these reports. We're going to conduct a formal investigation, and I suspect some people are going to be very surprised by how seriously we take veteran welfare at this level." As David hung up the phone, he felt a mixture of satisfaction and apprehension. He had served his country for nearly 3 decades and had never been one to seek attention or make waves unnecessarily. But sometimes a veteran had to stand up not just for himself, but for all the brothers and sisters who had served alongside him. The wheels of military justice and federal oversight were beginning to turn, and Jennifer Walsh had no idea that her casual disrespect toward an old man in work clothes was about to bring the full attention of the Pentagon down on her small-town VA office. Jennifer Walsh arrived at the Millfield VA office on Monday morning with her usual attitude of bored indifference. She parked her red convertible in the spot closest to the building entrance, despite the signs indicating those spaces were reserved for disabled veterans. Her designer handbag swung from her shoulder as she strutted through the automatic doors, already checking her phone for weekend social media notifications. The office felt different that morning, though Jennifer didn't immediately notice. Her supervisor, Regional Director Patricia Hernandez, stood near the reception desk with 2 men in dark suits who looked distinctly out of place in the small-town government office. Patricia's usually relaxed demeanor appeared strained, and her hands gestured nervously as she spoke in hushed tones with the visitors. "Jennifer, could you please come to my office immediately?" Patricia called out as soon as she spotted her employee. The tone was sharper than usual, causing Jennifer to look up from her phone with mild curiosity rather than concern. "Sure, whatever," Jennifer replied, dropping her purse behind the reception desk and following Patricia down the hallway. She remained oblivious to the gravity of the situation developing around her. Patricia's office was cramped with additional people. Besides the 2 men in suits, a woman in military dress uniform sat rigidly in one of the chairs facing Patricia's desk. Her insignia identified her as a full colonel, and her bearing radiated the kind of authority that came from years of commanding respect in difficult situations. "Jennifer Walsh," Patricia began, her voice carefully controlled. "This is Colonel Sarah Mitchell from the Pentagon's Veterans Affairs Liaison Office, Agent Thompson, and Agent Martinez from the VA Inspector General's office." Jennifer plopped down in the remaining empty chair with casual indifference. "Okay, what's this about? Did someone complain about something again?" Colonel Mitchell studied Jennifer for a moment before speaking. Her voice carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. "Ms. Walsh, we're here to discuss your interaction last Friday with retired Master Sergeant David Chun. Who? Jennifer asked, genuinely not remembering the name. The veteran who came in for his appointment regarding his disability claim. You told him his caseworker wasn't available and suggested he was seeking special treatment. Agent Thompson interjected, consulting his notes. Jennifer shrugged. Look, we get tons of people in here every day. I can't remember every single person who walks through that door. If his caseworker wasn't here, then his caseworker wasn't here. I don't know what the big deal is. Colonel Mitchell leaned forward slightly. The big deal, Ms. Walsh, is that Master Sergeant Chun served 28 years in the United States Army, including 3 combat deployments where he earned a Purple Heart, Bronze Star with Valor, and Combat Infantryman Badge. He led soldiers in some of the most dangerous missions our military has conducted in the past 2 decades. Okay, good for him, Jennifer replied with the same dismissive tone she had used with David. But that doesn't mean he gets to skip the line or ignore our procedures. Agent Martinez opened a folder and pulled out several documents. Ms. Walsh, according to our investigation, Master Sergeant Chin wasn't asking to skip any lines. He had a scheduled appointment that your office confirmed 3 times. His caseworker, Mrs. Rebecca Torres, was indeed in the building that day and available for appointments. Jennifer's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. Well, maybe I made a mistake about her schedule. That's not the primary concern, Colonel Mitchell continued. The concern is that you questioned the legitimacy of his service, suggested he hadn't seen combat, and accused him of seeking government handouts. I never said that exactly, Jennifer protested, though her voice lacked conviction. Agent Thompson consulted another document. We have statements from 4 veterans who were in the waiting room during your interaction with Master Sergeant Chin. All 4 described your behavior as disrespectful and unprofessional. One witness, Sergeant First Class Marcus Williams, recorded part of the conversation on his phone. Jennifer's carefully constructed casual attitude began to crack. People record conversations all the time. That doesn't mean anything. Colonel Mitchell's expression grew colder. Ms. Walsh, let me explain something about Master Sergeant Chun that you clearly failed to recognize. He's not just any veteran seeking assistance. He's a soldier who carried wounded comrades to safety under enemy fire. He's a leader who volunteered for the most dangerous missions to keep younger soldiers safe. He's a man who spent over a quarter of his life serving a country that promised to take care of him when his service was complete. I'm sure he's very heroic, Jennifer said with obvious sarcasm, but I still don't see why I'm being interrogated like I committed some crime. Patricia Hernandez finally spoke up, her voice tight with stress. Jennifer, this investigation extends beyond just your interaction with Master Sergeant Chin. We've discovered a pattern of complaints about your treatment of veterans over the past 6 months. Agent Martinez pulled out a thick file. 18 formal complaints, 23 informal reports from other staff members, and multiple instances of veterans requesting to work with different employees specifically to avoid you. Jennifer's face began to flush red. That's not fair. These old guys come in here expecting everyone to bow down to them just because they were in the military. Half of them are probably lying about what they did anyway. The room fell completely silent. Colonel Mitchell's jaw visibly tightened, and even Agent Thompson looked shocked by the brazen disrespect. Ms. Walsh, Colonel Mitchell said slowly, you just demonstrated exactly the attitude that brought federal investigators to this office. You're sitting in front of a decorated combat veteran and 2 federal agents, discussing your treatment of American heroes, and you're doubling down on your disrespect. Jennifer suddenly realized the seriousness of her situation. Look, I didn't mean anything personal. I just do my job the best I can. Agent Thompson leaned forward. Your job is to assist veterans with accessing the benefits they've earned through their service. Instead, you've created an environment where veterans dread coming to this office for help. We've also discovered, Agent Martinez added, that you've deliberately delayed processing paperwork for veterans you found annoying and have made personal judgments about which claims you thought were legitimate. Jennifer's composure finally cracked completely. You can't prove that. I process everything according to the rules. Colonel Mitchell stood up, her full height, and bearing emphasizing her authority. Ms. Walsh, Master Sergeant Chin's disability claim was for injuries sustained during a rocket attack on his forward operating base in Afghanistan. He has medical documentation from 3 different military hospitals confirming his injuries. His claim was delayed not due to missing paperwork or bureaucratic procedures, but because it was sitting in your desk drawer, apparently forgotten. That's not true, Jennifer stammered, but her protest sounded weak even to her own ears. Patricia Hernandez opened her desk drawer and pulled out a file folder. Jennifer, we found this in your desk when we conducted the office search this morning. Master Sergeant Chin's complete file, with all required documentation, stamped as received 18 months ago. Jennifer stared at the folder as if it were a poisonous snake. There must be some mistake. I would never deliberately delay someone's claim. Agent Thompson consulted his notes again. We also found similar files for 7 other veterans, all delayed without justification. The estimated total in delayed benefits exceeds $200,000. The weight of the situation finally crashed down on Jennifer. She was facing not just employment termination, but potential criminal charges for deliberately interfering with federal benefit programs. Her casual disrespect toward veterans had escalated into a serious federal investigation. What happens now? Jennifer asked quietly, her earlier arrogance completely gone. Now, Colonel Mitchell replied, you're suspended pending a full investigation. Criminal charges may be filed, depending on what else we discover. And, most importantly, every veteran whose claim you've delayed will receive immediate attention to resolve their cases. Patricia Hernandez looked exhausted. Jennifer, please clean out your personal belongings. Your building access is revoked effective immediately. As Jennifer gathered her few personal items from her desk, the other VA staff members watched in stunned silence. Many of them had witnessed her poor treatment of veterans, but had felt powerless to intervene or report the behavior. The sudden arrival of federal investigators and Pentagon officials demonstrated that someone had been paying attention after all. While Jennifer packed her belongings, Colonel Mitchell addressed the remaining staff. Ladies and gentlemen, every veteran who walks through these doors has earned your respect and your best efforts. They've written blank checks to this country, payable up to and including their lives. The least we can do is treat them with dignity when they need our help. The office manager, a veteran herself, spoke up. Colonel, most of us have been trying to provide good service despite the problems with Ms. Walsh. We want veterans to receive the help they deserve. I believe that, Colonel Mitchell replied. And that's why this office will receive additional oversight and training to ensure these problems don't happen again. As Jennifer walked out of the building carrying a small cardboard box, she passed David Chun in the parking lot. He was arriving for another appointment, this time to finally complete the processing of his delayed claim. Jennifer recognized him and felt a flush of shame as she realized this unassuming man in work clothes had somehow brought the Pentagon's attention to her behavior. David nodded politely as she passed, showing the same courtesy he had displayed during their first encounter. His gracious response to her presence, even after everything she had put him through, only emphasized the magnitude of her own failure to treat him with basic human decency. Inside the building, Colonel Mitchell was reviewing the cases of every veteran whose files had been mishandled. Each delay represented not just bureaucratic failure, but real human suffering. Veterans unable to receive medical treatment, families struggling with financial hardship, and heroes forced to fight their own government for benefits they had earned through blood and sacrifice. The investigation would continue for several more weeks, but the immediate message was clear. The Pentagon was watching, veteran service would be respected, and those who failed to honor America's promises to its warriors would be held accountable. Jennifer Walsh had learned too late that the elderly man she had dismissed as just another complainer seeking handouts was actually a decorated combat veteran with friends in very high places. Friends who took veteran welfare very seriously indeed. Word spread through Millfield like wildfire. By Tuesday afternoon, everyone in the small town knew that federal investigators had shut down the local VA office and escorted Jennifer Walsh out in front of a growing crowd of onlookers. The Coffee Cup Diner, where local veterans gathered every morning for breakfast, buzzed with animated conversations about what people were calling the Pentagon incident. Tom Bradley, a Vietnam veteran who had lost his left leg to a landmine in 1971, stirred his coffee thoughtfully as he listened to the other veterans share their stories about Jennifer Walsh. "I tell you what," he said finally, "that woman made me feel like I was begging for charity every time I walked into that place. Made me ashamed to ask for help with benefits I bled for." Around the table, heads nodded in agreement. These men had served their country in different wars and different decades, but they all shared the common experience of being treated poorly by someone who had never worn a uniform or understood the weight of military service. "Remember when she told Jimmy Martinez that his PTSD claim was probably fake because he looked fine to her?" added Frank Rivera, a Gulf War veteran who worked at the local hardware store. Jimmy hadn't slept through the night in 6 months, but she thought she could diagnose him just by looking at him. The stories continued around the table, each veteran sharing experiences that painted a picture of systematic disrespect and deliberate delays in processing their benefits. What they didn't know was that their conversations were being overheard by Linda Patterson, a reporter for the regional newspaper who had come to investigate the federal raid on the VA office. Linda had initially planned to write a simple news story about a government employee being terminated for poor performance. But as she listened to the veterans share their experiences, she realized this was a much bigger story about how America treats its heroes and what happens when someone finally stands up for veteran rights. Meanwhile, at the Pentagon, Colonel Sarah Mitchell was briefing her commanding officer, Major General Robert Hayes, about the expanding investigation. The general, a veteran of both Iraq and Afghanistan who had risen through the ranks from enlisted soldier to general officer, listened with growing anger as Sarah detailed the scope of Jennifer Walsh's misconduct. "How many veterans were affected?" General Hayes asked, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Initial count shows 47 veterans had their claims deliberately delayed or mishandled by Walsh over the past 18 months, Sarah replied, consulting her tablet. Total delayed benefits exceed $400,000. Some veterans have been waiting over 2 years for legitimate claims to be processed." General Hayes stood up and walked to the window of his Pentagon office, looking out at the sprawling complex that housed the nerve center of American military operations. "Colonel, I want a full audit of every VA office in that region. This level of systematic abuse doesn't happen in isolation." "Already underway, sir. We've also identified similar patterns in 3 other offices in surrounding counties. It appears this was a regional culture problem, not just one bad employee." "What about Master Sergeant Shin? Have we taken care of his situation?" Sarah smiled for the first time in days. "His claim was approved and processed within 24 hours once we removed the bureaucratic obstacles. He'll receive full retroactive benefits plus compensation for the unreasonable delay. More importantly, he's being recognized for his role in exposing this systemic problem." Back in Millfield, David Chun was unaware of the discussions happening in his honor at the highest levels of military leadership. He spent Tuesday morning in his workshop, restoring an antique rocking chair he had found at a yard sale. The methodical work of sanding and refinishing would help calm his mind, much the same way weapons maintenance had provided focus during his military career. His wife Maria brought him a cup of coffee and the morning newspaper. The front page featured a large photograph of the VA office with the headline, "Federal Investigation Shuts Down Local VA Office." Below the headline was a smaller story about David's role in exposing the problems. "You're famous," Maria said with a mixture of pride and concern. "I hope this doesn't bring unwanted attention." David skimmed the article, which portrayed him as a humble veteran who had stood up for his fellow service members. The reporter had interviewed several local veterans who praised David for having the courage to make the phone call that started the investigation. "I'm not looking for attention," David replied. "I just wanted veterans to be treated with respect." As if summoned by their conversation, David's phone rang. The caller ID showed Colonel Mitchell's number. "Good morning, David. I hope I'm not disturbing your day." "Not at all, ma'am. How can I help you?" "Actually, I'm calling to help you. Are you available for a phone call with my commanding general this afternoon?" Major General Hayes would like to speak with you personally. David nearly dropped his coffee cup. In 28 years of military service, he had never spoken directly with a two-star general. Ma'am, is there some problem with my case? Sarah laughed. Quite the opposite, David. General Hayes wants to thank you personally and discuss some broader initiatives we're developing to improve veteran services nationwide. Would 2 o'clock work for you? After agreeing to the call, David sat in his workshop for several minutes, processing the surreal turn his simple complaint had taken. He had never imagined that calling an old colleague about poor service would result in federal investigations and conversations with Pentagon generals. At exactly 2 o'clock, David's phone rang again. This time, the voice on the other end carried the unmistakable authority of senior military leadership. Master Sergeant Chun, this is Major General Hayes. Thank you for taking my call. It's my honor to speak with you, sir. The honor is mine, Master Sergeant. Your actions have exposed serious problems in how we're serving our veterans, and I want you to know that your courage in speaking up is making a real difference. David felt overwhelmed by the praise. Sir, I just made a phone call. Other people did all the hard work. You did more than make a phone call, Master Sergeant. You stood up for every veteran who has been mistreated by the system. That takes moral courage, and it's exactly the kind of leadership we expect from our senior NCOs, even in retirement. General Hayes went on to explain that David's case had become a catalyst for a comprehensive review of veteran services in the region. The Pentagon was implementing new oversight procedures, mandatory respect training for all VA employees, and direct channels for veterans to report problems without fear of retaliation. We're also establishing the Master Sergeant Chin Award for Excellence in Veteran Services, General Hayes continued. It will recognize VA employees who go above and beyond to serve our veterans with dignity and respect. David was speechless. Having an award named after him felt far beyond anything he deserved for simply expecting basic courtesy from government employees. Sir, that's very generous, but I'm not sure I've done anything worthy of that kind of recognition. Master Sergeant, you've reminded us all that every veteran deserves to be treated as a hero, not as a burden. That's exactly the kind of reminder we need. The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with General Hayes asking for David's input on various veteran service initiatives. The general seemed genuinely interested in David's perspective as both a combat veteran and someone who had experienced the problems in the system firsthand. After ending the call, David walked outside to find Maria tending to her vegetable garden. He stood quietly for a moment, watching her work among the tomatoes and peppers they would harvest for their winter meals. This simple, peaceful scene felt surreal after his conversation with one of the most powerful generals in the American military. How did your call go? Maria asked without looking up from her plants. I think I'm still processing it, David replied honestly. They want to name an award after me. Maria straightened up and smiled at her husband. They should. You've always stood up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. That evening, the local news ran a story about the expanding federal investigation. The reporter had interviewed several veterans who described Jennifer Walsh's treatment of them over the past year. One elderly veteran broke down, crying, as he described how Walsh had made him feel ashamed for seeking help with his medical benefits. The story also featured an interview with Patricia Hernandez, who admitted that her office had received complaints about Walsh but had failed to take adequate action. We should have done better, Hernandez said. Our veterans deserved better. As the week progressed, more details emerged about the scope of the investigation. 3 other VA offices in the region were placed under federal oversight, and several employees were suspended pending review of their treatment of veterans. The story gained national attention when a major news network picked it up as an example of systemic problems in veteran services. Jennifer Walsh, meanwhile, had hired a lawyer and was maintaining her innocence despite overwhelming evidence of her misconduct. She claimed she was being made a scapegoat for broader problems in the VA system and insisted she had always tried to do her job properly. But the evidence against her continued to mount. Investigators found emails where she had mocked veterans' appearance and questioned the legitimacy of their service. They discovered that she had deliberately delayed paperwork for veterans she considered demanding or difficult. Most damaging of all, they found a desk drawer where she had hidden claims from veterans she simply didn't want to deal with. David followed the news coverage with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. He was glad that the problems were being addressed and that other veterans would receive better treatment in the future. But he was saddened that it had taken a federal investigation to ensure that American heroes were treated with basic human dignity by their own government. The real victory, David realized, wasn't in Jennifer Walsh's punishment or even in the improvements to the VA system. The real victory was in the message being sent to every veteran in America. Your service matters, your sacrifices are recognized, and when someone treats you with disrespect, there are people in positions of power who will hold them accountable. For David Chun, that was worth far more than any award or recognition. It was proof that the values he had served to defend, honor, respect, and accountability still meant something in America. 3 weeks after Jennifer Walsh's termination, the Millfield VA office reopened under new management with a completely transformed atmosphere. Rebecca Torres, the caseworker who had been mysteriously unavailable during David's original visit, had been promoted to interim director. Her first official act was to personally call every veteran whose case had been delayed by Jennifer Walsh's misconduct. The office itself had been renovated during the closure. Gone were the sterile fluorescent lights and uncomfortable plastic chairs. Instead, warm lighting illuminated leather seating areas with coffee tables displaying current magazines and local newspapers. On the walls hung photographs of local veterans and their units, creating a gallery that honored the service of community members rather than displaying generic patriotic posters. Most importantly, new procedures ensured that every veteran entering the building would be greeted with respect and genuine assistance. Staff members received intensive training on military culture, the significance of various awards and decorations, and the proper way to address veterans of different ranks and service branches. David Chun arrived for his follow-up appointment on a crisp October morning, driving the same old pickup truck but feeling considerably different about the visit. As he walked through the front entrance, he immediately noticed the changed atmosphere. Behind a reception desk sat Carlos Martinez, a young Iraq War veteran whose own military bearing was evident in his posture and professional demeanor. "Good morning, Master Sergeant Chun," Carlos said, standing up and offering a slight nod of respect. "I'm Carlos Martinez, Army, 82nd Airborne. It's an honor to meet you, sir." David returned the acknowledgement with a smile. "Morning, Carlos. Airborne, all the way. How can I help you today?" "Sir, I should be asking how I can help you. Mrs. Torres is waiting for you in conference room A. Can I escort you there?" As they walked through the office, David noticed other veterans being assisted by staff members who clearly understood the weight of military service. An elderly Korean War veteran was being helped with his paperwork by a woman who addressed him as Sergeant and spoke to him with obvious respect. A younger female Marine was meeting with a counselor who had her own military decorations displayed on her desk. Rebecca Torres stood up when David entered the conference room. A Hispanic woman in her 40s with 20 years of government service, she had been horrified to discover how Jennifer Walsh had been treating veterans while she focused on processing complex medical claims in her back office. "Master Sergeant Chun, please sit down," she said, gesturing to a comfortable chair at a small conference table. "I owe you a sincere apology for what happened in this office. Your service to our country should have been honored, not dismissed." David took a seat, noting the coffee service and the folder of documents neatly arranged on the table. "Mrs. Torres, you weren't the person who mistreated me. You don't need to apologize for someone else's actions." "But I do," Rebecca replied firmly. "As the senior caseworker, I should have been aware of how veterans were being treated in our front office. The fact that Jennifer Walsh could systematically mistreat veterans for months without my knowledge represents a failure of leadership on my part." She opened the folder and pulled out several documents. "However, I can ensure that we make this right going forward. Your disability claim has been approved for full benefits, retroactive to your original filing date. You'll receive compensation for the 18-month delay plus interest. More importantly, I want to personally oversee any future interactions you have with this office." David reviewed the paperwork, noting that his benefits were actually higher than he had originally expected. The medical documentation from his combat injuries had been properly evaluated by qualified professionals rather than dismissed by someone with no medical training. "Mrs. Torres, this is more than fair. But I have to ask, what's being done to ensure other veterans don't face the same problems?" Rebecca smiled, clearly pleased by the question. "Master Sergeant, your case has triggered the most comprehensive review of veteran services in this region in over a decade. Every VA office within a 300-mile radius is being audited. New oversight procedures have been implemented, and all staff members are receiving mandatory training on veteran services and military culture." She pulled out another document. "Additionally, the Pentagon has established a direct hotline for veterans to report problems without going through local channels. Colonel Mitchell wanted you to have the direct number in case you ever encounter difficulties again." As they completed the paperwork, Rebecca shared some of the positive changes that had resulted from the investigation. The regional VA administration had increased funding for staff training and veteran services. Several long-delayed claims had been fast-tracked for approval. Most importantly, a new culture of respect and accountability was being established throughout the system. "There's one more thing," Rebecca said as they finished the business portion of their meeting. "Colonel Mitchell asked me to give you this." She handed David an official envelope with Pentagon letterhead. Inside was an invitation to a ceremony in Washington, D.C., where he would be recognized for his role in improving veteran services nationwide. The invitation was signed by Major General Hayes himself. "Mrs. Torres, this is overwhelming. I just made a phone call to report a problem. Master Sergeant, you did what leaders do. You stood up for people who needed someone to advocate for them. That phone call has improved conditions for thousands of veterans across the country." After completing his business at the VA office, David drove to the Coffee Cup Diner, where the morning veteran gathering was already in progress. As he entered the restaurant, the conversations quieted and every veteran in the place turned to look at him. For a moment, David worried that the attention his case had received might have made his fellow veterans uncomfortable. Then Tom Bradley stood up slowly, his prosthetic leg making the movement deliberate and careful. "Attention," he called out in a voice that still carried the authority of his military service. Every veteran in the diner came to attention, creating a moment of military precision in the middle of a small-town restaurant. David stood frozen in the doorway, overwhelmed by the unexpected honor. "Master Sergeant David Chun," Tom announced formally, "on behalf of every veteran in this room, and every veteran who will be treated with respect because of your courage, thank you." The room erupted in applause and cheers. Veterans who had served in different wars and different branches came forward to shake David's hand and thank him for standing up for all of them. Frank Rivera, the Gulf War veteran, had tears in his eyes as he clasped David's shoulder. "You gave us our dignity back," Frank said quietly. "For the first time in years, I'm proud to walk into that VA office." David spent the next hour listening to stories from his fellow veterans about their improved experiences at the newly reopened office. Carlos Martinez, the young veteran now working at the reception desk, had been hired specifically because Rebecca Torres wanted staff who understood military service. Two other recent hires were also veterans, creating an environment where service members helped service members. The transformation extended beyond just personnel changes. The entire culture of the office had shifted from one of bureaucratic indifference to genuine care for veteran welfare. Staff members now took time to understand each veteran's unique situation rather than treating everyone as generic paperwork to be processed. As David drove home that afternoon, his phone rang with a call from Colonel Mitchell. "David, I wanted to personally confirm that you received the invitation to the Pentagon ceremony. I hope you can make it." "Ma'am, I'm honored by the recognition, but I'm still not sure I deserve all this attention." Sarah laughed. "David, let me tell you about some of the letters we've received since your story went public. Veterans from all over the country have written to thank you for standing up for them. Many of them shared their own stories of poor treatment at VA offices, and several have used your example to file formal complaints about problems in their local offices. She paused for a moment. You didn't just solve your own problem, David. You started a movement. Veterans across America are demanding better treatment because you showed them it was possible to hold the system accountable. That evening, David sat on his front porch with Maria, watching the sunset over their small farm. The autumn air was crisp and peaceful, carrying the sounds of birds settling in for the night and the distant hum of traffic on the county road. Are you going to accept the Pentagon invitation? Maria asked, rocking gently in the wooden chair David had restored the previous summer. I think I have to, David replied. Not for me, but for all the veterans who didn't have the connections to make that phone call. If going to Washington helps improve things for them, then it's worth it. Maria reached over and took his hand. I'm proud of you, not just for serving our country, but for continuing to serve even after you came home. As they sat in comfortable silence, David reflected on how much had changed in just a few weeks. A simple attempt to check on his disability claim had mushroomed into a national conversation about how America treats its veterans. Jennifer Walsh's disrespect had inadvertently triggered the most comprehensive review of veteran services in years. The irony wasn't lost on David that Jennifer's attempt to dismiss him as just another old man seeking handouts had resulted in her own dismissal and a complete transformation of a system she had abused. Her casual cruelty toward veterans had brought the full weight of Pentagon oversight down on her office, creating lasting improvements for thousands of veterans she would never meet. More importantly, the story had sent a clear message to every VA employee in America. Veteran service matters, their sacrifices deserve respect, and those who fail to honor that principle will be held accountable at the highest levels of government. For David Chun, that was the real victory. Not the recognition or the awards, but the knowledge that his fellow veterans would be treated with the dignity they had earned through their service to America. 6 months later, on a bright spring morning in Washington, D.C., David Chun stood in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes wearing his dress blue uniform for the first time in 5 years. The medals on his chest caught the light streaming through the tall windows as he waited with Maria and Colonel Sarah Mitchell for the ceremony to begin. Around them, senior military officers and Pentagon officials gathered to witness what Major General Hayes had called a recognition long overdue. The past months had brought changes David never could have imagined. The Master Sergeant Chun Award for Excellence in Veteran Services had been established with a substantial budget to recognize outstanding VA employees across the country. The Pentagon's Veteran Advocacy Hotline had received over 3,000 calls in its first 6 months, leading to investigations at 47 VA offices nationwide and the termination or discipline of dozens of employees who had mistreated veterans. More importantly, veteran satisfaction scores at VA offices had improved dramatically as word spread that poor treatment would no longer be tolerated. The transformation had started in Millfield, but had rippled across the entire veteran services system, creating a new culture of accountability and respect. David, are you ready for this? Sarah asked as they prepared to enter the main ceremony hall. As ready as anyone can be for something this unexpected, David replied with a slight smile. 5 years ago, I never imagined I'd be back in the Pentagon for anything other than a historical tour. The ceremony hall was filled with distinguished guests, including several members of Congress, senior Pentagon officials, and veterans advocacy group leaders. But what moved David most were the 43 veterans who had traveled to Washington at their own expense to honor the man whose courage had improved their lives. Among them sat Tom Bradley, the Vietnam veteran who had called the diner to attention months earlier. Beside him was Carlos Martinez, now permanent director of the Millfield VA office after Rebecca Torres received a promotion to regional oversight. Frank Rivera had driven 18 hours from Millfield with 5 other local veterans, all wearing their military decorations and civilian suits pressed for the special occasion. Major General Hayes took the podium as the ceremony began, his presence commanding immediate attention from everyone in the room. Ladies and gentlemen, we gather today to recognize an extraordinary act of moral courage that has improved the lives of veterans across our nation. Master Sergeant David Chin's decision to speak up about poor treatment at his local VA office has triggered the most comprehensive reform of veteran services in over 2 decades. The general paused, scanning the audience before continuing. But this recognition is about more than one man's actions. It's about the principle that every American who has worn our nation's uniform deserves to be treated with dignity and respect when they seek the benefits they've earned through their service. He gestured toward David. Master Sergeant Chun served 28 years in the United States Army, including 3 combat deployments where he led soldiers through some of the most dangerous missions our military has undertaken. He earned the Purple Heart for wounds received in combat, the Bronze Star with valor for heroic actions under fire, and the Combat Infantryman Badge for service with distinction in ground combat. The audience listened intently as General Hayes recounted David's military career, from his early years as a young soldier learning leadership principles to his final years as a senior NCO mentoring the next generation of military leaders. But Master Sergeant Chin's service to his country didn't end when he retired. The general continued. When he witnessed systematic disrespect toward veterans at his local VA office, he could have simply accepted poor treatment and moved on. Instead, he chose to act, not just for himself, but for every veteran who would walk through those doors after him. General Hayes called David to the podium, where he presented him with the Secretary of Defense Medal for Outstanding Public Service, one of the highest civilian awards the Pentagon can bestow. This medal recognizes exceptional service by individuals who are not employed by the Department of Defense, but whose actions have significantly benefited our military community, the general explained. Master Sergeant Chin's advocacy for proper veteran treatment has improved conditions for tens of thousands of veterans nationwide. David accepted the medal with characteristic humility, his voice steady as he addressed the audience. "Thank you for this tremendous honor, but I want to be clear that I didn't do anything extraordinary. I simply expected to be treated with basic respect and spoke up when that didn't happen. The real heroes are the people in this room and the investigators who took action when I reported the problem." He paused, looking out at the assembled veterans who had come to support him. Every person who has worn our nation's uniform has written a blank check to the United States of America, payable up to and including their life. When we come home from our service, we expect our country to honor the promises made to us. Not charity, not handouts, but the benefits we've earned through our willingness to sacrifice everything for our fellow citizens. David's voice grew stronger as he continued. What happened in Millfield was wrong, but it wasn't unique. Too many veterans have been made to feel ashamed for seeking help they've rightfully earned. That stops now. Every VA employee who cannot treat veterans with dignity and respect should find another job, because serving those who have served is a sacred trust. The audience erupted in sustained applause, with many of the veterans rising to their feet in recognition of David's words. After the formal ceremony, David spent hours talking with veterans who had traveled to Washington to thank him personally. Each had their own story of improved treatment at VA offices since his case had gained national attention. Maria stood beside her husband as he listened to a young Marine who had lost both legs to an IED in Afghanistan. The Marine explained how David's example had given him the courage to file a formal complaint about poor treatment at his local VA office, leading to significant improvements in that facility's service. "You showed us that someone was listening," the Marine told David. "For the first time since I came home, I felt like my service actually mattered to the people in charge." As the afternoon wound down, Sarah Mitchell approached David with a final surprise. "David, there's one more recognition I want to share with you. We've received a letter from the President of the United States." She handed him an official White House envelope containing a personal letter from the President thanking him for his service and his advocacy for veterans' rights. The letter praised David's courage in speaking up and noted that his actions had led to significant improvements in veteran services nationwide. "The President wanted you to know that your example has inspired a renewed commitment to honoring our promises to America's veterans," Sarah explained. David read the letter twice, still finding it difficult to believe that his simple phone call had reached the highest levels of American government. That evening, David and Maria joined the other veterans at a dinner hosted by the Pentagon. The atmosphere was celebratory, but also reflective, as veterans from different generations and conflicts shared stories of their service and their experiences with the VA system. Tom Bradley, the Vietnam veteran who had become something of a spokesman for the Millfield veterans, stood up to offer a toast. To David Chun, who reminded us all that one person standing up for what's right can change everything. And to every veteran in this room, your service matters, your sacrifices are recognized, and your country is grateful. The room raised their glasses in unanimous agreement, creating a moment of unity that transcended the differences in their backgrounds and experiences. As David and Maria returned to their hotel that evening, they reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a simple attempt to check on a delayed disability claim. "Do you think this will really make a lasting difference?" Maria asked as they walked through the hotel lobby. "I think it already has," David replied. "But more importantly, it's shown veterans that they don't have to accept poor treatment. They have voices, and when they use them, people in positions of power will listen." The next morning, as they prepared to fly back to their quiet farm in Millfield, David received a phone call from Rebecca Torres at the VA office. "Master Sergeant, I wanted you to know that we've just been selected as the model office for veteran services in our region. Delegations from 12 other states are coming to study our procedures and learn how to implement similar improvements in their offices." David smiled as he listened to Rebecca describe the continuing transformation of veteran services. What had started as a personal complaint had become a blueprint for national reform, proving that ordinary citizens could still hold their government accountable when it failed to meet its obligations. As their plane lifted off from Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport, David looked down at the Pentagon and the monuments to America's military heroes scattered throughout the nation's capital. He thought about all the veterans who had come before him and all those who would serve in the future. Jennifer Walsh's casual disrespect had inadvertently triggered a movement that would improve veteran services for generations to come. Her attempt to dismiss an old soldier as unworthy of proper treatment had resulted in nationwide reforms and renewed commitment to honoring America's promises to its heroes. For David Chun, that transformation represented the best of American values. The principle that ordinary citizens could demand accountability from their government and that those who serve their country deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. The Pentagon had answered, and veterans across America were better for it.